Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Sharmistha Guha, and I'm an assistant professor of statistics at Texas A&M University. And today I'll be moderating this session, which is called Mastering Communication Skills for Collaborative Research in Statistics and Data Science, where we have three esteemed panelists who will speak about their experience in scientific and methodological collaboration, what they learned along the way. We hope to learn a lot from their experiences. So here are our panelists for today. Dr. Joel A. Dubin, who is a professor in the Department of Statistics and Actuarial Science and the School of Public Health Sciences at the University of Waterloo in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, where he has been since 2005. Earlier, he was an assistant professor in the Division of Biostatistics, Department of Epidemiology and Public Health at Yale University from 2000 to 2005. Joel received his PhD in statistics in 2000 from the University of California, Davis. Our second panelist is Dr. Sahar Zangeneh, who is a senior research statistician at RTI, who specializes in various aspects of the design and analysis of complex sample surveys. She develops novel statistical methods for non-ignorable missing data using both classical and modern statistical methods, including parametric and non-parametric, likelihood-based and Bayesian methods, as well as machine learning tools. Before joining RTI in 2021, Dr. Zangeneh worked as a faculty biostatistician at the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Division at Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center, where she also completed her postdoctoral training. Our third panelist today is Dr. Justin Strait, who's a scientist in the Statistical Sciences Group at Los Alamos National Labs. His research expertise is in Bayesian and non-parametric modeling of complex object-oriented data, such as functions, shapes, images, and tensors. Many of the problems he works on at LANL are applied collaborative problems in earth science, engineering, and material science, and he has experience disseminating analysis to both statistics and non-statistics audiences. Dr. Strait earned a BS in mathematics and atmospheric sciences from the University of Utah in 2013 before obtaining a MS in 2016 and a PhD in statistics in 2018 from the Ohio State University. Prior to joining LANL, he was an assistant professor at the University of Georgia. Welcome to the three of you for and we can start the panel. So I'll start off with the first question, and you can talk about your collaborations. So can you talk a little bit about the types of collaborations that you're involved in and where your collaborators are affiliated? So we can start with Sahar or Joel or Justin.
Sure, I could go. So thank you, Sharmistha, for the introduction. I'm currently at RTI International, which is a nonprofit research organization. So we work, we're basically like a large or medium-sized consulting firm. So we work with a variety of different clients, both on federal projects and on federally funded research projects. So the collaborators that I work with are researchers in the federal government, like the CDC or the NIH, both intramural and extramural. There are also subject level experts on from different academic institutes. And I do have a little bit of involvement with private sector clients as well. Mostly pharmaceutical. So that's kind of a variety of the type of work that I do. And before that, I was at Fred Hutch in the Vaccine Infectious Disease Division, primarily working on HIV prevention studies. Again, we were on federally funded grants and contracts, but most of the collaborators that I worked with on a day-to-day basis were clinicians and other subject level experts on HIV. So in general, I work on right now I'm working on a variety of different disease areas, kind of under the umbrella of public health more generally. So the subject level experts are clinicians, social scientists, and community liaisons and advocacy groups and whatnot.
Okay, thank you. Joel, Justin.
Justin, you want me to go first? Okay. Yeah, thank you, Sharmistha. Yeah, so my particular collaborations are in many ways traditional and an academic environment, but from the point of view of being a biostatistician, biostatistics faculty member. So I work with people in public health and in the faculty of health more generally. And for example, there's a department of kinesiology, and I work with some people there. We have a school of pharmacy. I've worked with some people there, and then beyond that as well, in the faculty of environment and department of psychology and so on. But I would say the majority of my collaborations are dealing with other faculty members in public health. Some of my colleagues do deal with work with industrial partners and government partners. I don't do that too often. I would say I'm pretty much insulated within academia, and I do collaborate as well with some of my departmental members on methodological projects as well. But in terms of kind of applied collaborations, those are most typically with people in the faculty of health. I would say majority of those, and yeah, and I've been doing those kind of collaborations for a number of years. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, so I'm a statistician at Los Alamos, which is if you're not familiar, because I wasn't familiar as a grad student until I came here to start working here. National labs are sort of I think of it as sort of an in-between of sort of a hybrid between academia and industry. And so there's several national labs throughout the country. Los Alamos is a lab that's sponsored through the Department of Energy, as well as the National Nuclear Safety and Security Administration, the NNSA. And so I guess the collaborations we worked on, and I guess maybe I could quickly describe the way we function is I'm in a statistics group, which is sort of like a department, and all of us work on a bunch of different projects that span all kinds of applications in nuclear material management, safeguards. There are people that work in climate modeling, disease forecasting, all kinds of applications. Our projects are sort of a mix of things that are program sponsored, either by the Department of Energy or the NNSA. And so I have some collaborations that are sort of falling under that category. And so a lot of those are with, engineers, physicists, geoscientists. A lot of the physical sciences is who we work with. And those sort of have like a target customer that we have to provide deliverables and stuff for. And then the labs also, at least our lab has some of these internal projects that are more research oriented. And so here they call that sort of lab directed research and development. And you can think of those as just these big internal collaborative projects with statisticians, with other scientists. And so I've been on a couple of those as well. So I have a mix of sort of scientific collaborators that are not statisticians, as well as statistician collaborators, whether they're in my group or academics in universities. Sharmistha is one of them. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Okay, so the next question I have is, so can you talk about things that you learned after you got out of school, things that you did not possibly learn in school, maybe doing stat consulting classes? So practical experience is important, and it actually lets us learn much more beyond school. So can you talk about what you've learned about collaboration in that respect?
Joel, do you want to start? Because I think yours is probably the shortest pivot from grad school. And then
Yeah, well, interestingly, before I went for my doctoral program, I had got a master's degree, and then I worked for a few years, and including at a cancer center at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, and that's an academic cancer center, and so I worked under a supervisor who was who was a academic researcher, biostatistician researcher, and so I got involved in some collaborative projects with cancer doctors there. Sometimes I just kind of kept quiet while Jack Lee, who was my supervisor at the time, he was asking the questions, but then there were, I got enough experience that I got to ask some questions too and meet with some of the doctors, even myself, just by myself. So I got some good experience there. And then when I went for my doctoral program, I also got involved in a particular collaborative project with a nephrologist, kidney doctor at the University of California, Davis. And that was really helpful too. And so I actually got to learn a bit about collaboration during those periods of time, even before finishing up my doctoral degree. So that was quite useful. I mean, I realize that not everyone is, maybe fortunate enough to get in those situations if they indeed do want to do collaboration with scientists outside of statistics. But that was my own personal experience, and that was great. And so by the time I was in my first academic job, I had that experience under my belt, and it really helped quite a bit, and just allowed me to forge a number of very fruitful collaborations in my first academic job, and then at University of Waterloo as well. So that's been good. So what I can say from that is, if you have the opportunity to get into those collaborations while you're a graduate student, I would highly recommend it. It can, just even if you're just shadowing your supervisor, or you're in any type of passive role like that, is if you can absorb some of the the interactions that do occur during collaborations, and gain some experience, understand the perspectives of other scientists who maybe have a very particular, maybe have their ego invested in a particular project, and understanding where they're coming from. I think that's a really invaluable experience. So I would recommend that. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Sahar, Justin.
Yes, I could go next. I think there's maybe two main things that I've learned a lot in the last few years since coming out of graduate school. I think one of them is sort of these skills in project management and time management. You don't, at least my experience in graduate school was, I was working on one specific research project, or maybe two, but they were very related to each other. My advisor was sort of there to sort of hold my hand to some extent with regards to how to sort of keep maintaining progress week to week. I struggled with that, I think, a little bit moving. I was an assistant professor for 3 years, and I think I struggled with some of the time management stuff as you start adding tasks, right? So you start having to teach, you have service roles that you have to perform, other sort of administrative things you have to do. I think some of that just takes some experience that you don't necessarily get as a graduate student. And I guess in starting at Los Alamos, you know, a lot of the people in the group I'm in work on at least 3 projects. And we're sort of the way we work is we sort of, each project has its own pot of money, and we sort of charge our time to these pots of money every week. And we every year we sort of have like, you know, we're going to work on this 50% of our time this year, 25% or whatever, for this particular project. And so sort of learning to like balance making progress on your projects sort of simultaneously is something that I've really had to learn, and sort of figuring out how to manage my time. You know, things like, you know, late in the afternoon, I'm not going to be very good at, I don't know, deriving some mathematical equation or implementing some new code. Maybe that's a better time to keep writing or make slides or do something that's a little less, requires a little bit less of your brain. And so sort of figuring out that balance of how to allocate your time across your projects is one thing. The other I was going to quickly mention, and maybe this ties into some of the other prompts as well, is just learning how to deliver your messages to different audiences, whether they're statisticians or maybe engineers that have taken a couple stats classes but haven't done some of the sophisticated modeling that we might do. Or maybe it's like a physicist or something who you know, doesn't do a whole lot of stats stuff. There's very different ways that you might want to communicate with these different audiences. And I didn't do a ton of collaborative work, I think, in graduate school, and that's something I've learned over the past few years. So.
Thank you. So I think I'll go next. My experience and journey is probably somewhere in between Joel and Justin's. So I was I did my undergrad in math, and I did a master's in industrial math before doing another master's in statistics. So I was in a statistics department, so I didn't really have the like research opportunity that much during grad school. I did teach a lot. So I have like, you know, I've been teaching for over 20 years. And I didn't see the connection between my teaching skills and my collaborative research skills immediately. It took a while for me to realize that these are some acquired skills that I could put to the practice in collaborative research. So that was that didn't reveal itself immediately. I did do 2 internships like during my graduate school years, which was probably like the closest I got to collaborative work. One was at Ford Motor Company in the credit department, where I was working on forecasting models and an application area that I haven't worked on for a long time. And then another one was on an RA with a professor at Michigan, where I went to school on a summer research. And it was, you know, doing some lit review. So it was a very like theoretical stats RA position where we were, you know, researching causal inference with interference. So it was, you know, it wasn't really like collaborative, but the professor that I was working with, he had some collaborations with sociologists, and therefore through that RA, I got to, you know, collaborate a bit peripherally, but shadow him collaborating with social scientists, which was, you know, who spoke a different language from what I was familiar with coming from a math stat background. So that was kind of like my big, like, you know, that was like the first like kind of shock to the system. And that it was like, you know, you have to use, you know, different languages. But I think some things that, and that was probably one of the main reasons that I ended up doing a postdoc, because I felt like I needed to kind of get my feet wet before going out in the collaborative world, if you will. And that was a great learning opportunity for me. A couple of things that I've kind of gained along the way are communication is really, I mean, I found it to be really important. Like the language and the way that I talk to a social scientist or a clinician or a mathematician are different. I try to, you know, convey the same message, but I had a mentor who advised me very early on in my career to avoid Greek letters. And he was like, if you talk to clinicians, do not put Greek letters in there because that just, you know, freaks people out. And I have learned that. So, you know, if I could, you know, I don't put, you know, Greek letters. I don't put like, you know, formulas. But I do try to kind of explain the interpretation of what that means. And I think, you know, this just requires a little bit of homework. So, you know, before meeting with a client or a collaborator, just kind of like checking in what their background is, and trying to gain some literacy in their language so that you can communicate better. Again, like the goal is not for us to be the subject level experts, because otherwise, you know, if we were, then there wouldn't be any need for collaborators. We are experts in what we do, they are experts in what they do. But I think some common language for communication, I found that that helps a lot. And then over the years, you kind of like gain some intuition about like what's right. And like I remember the first time that I worked with a statistical programmer, I ended up reproducing all the results on my own free time, just to make sure that, you know, that they had done it correctly. And now I kind of have the sniff test. You know, if someone provides a table to me, I could tell if there was an error in, like, you know, by staring at it for half an hour, without even like, you know, looking at their code or like, you know, doing the results, because, you know, you could kind of tell if something is off. So, and I think these things just kind of come with time. So it's okay if you don't get it the first time around, and if you have to, like, you know, reproduce code, you know, that's what you have to do. That's fine. But I think over time you do develop that intuition if that's something that you're after. Yeah, so I think the teaching skills like really do come in handy, because just because like our job is not just to be the doers, it's also to educate our collaborators on what is right. And hopefully, I mean, the best time for that is to do it before a deadline, and do it while, you know, everyone is kind of calm and has the bandwidth to listen. Because when things get very hectic, it's not really the time to propose alternative solutions or push back on anything. You just want to, you know, keep the train running and just calm people down. So yeah. So we also play the role of therapists sometimes, I think. It's just, you know, say it's going to be okay. We'll get through this.
Okay. Thank you. I want to tell the attendees that if you have any questions as our panelists speak, please feel free to put them in the chat. We can take questions as we go, or, you know, you're of course welcome to ask questions in the end.
Sure.
All right.
May I just follow
Yes.
Sahar's last comments? Because I think that's a really important item that does arise, which is, well, both the communication part, but working with collaborators who sometimes are on a different clock than what we prefer them to be on. And often we will be contacted not long before there's a deadline, such as a grant application or a paper resubmission, where they're asked to get a statistician involved. And you know, one thing that is really important is to convey that, you know, we're not consultants. I mean, unless that's, you know, your business. But as you know, we're talking about collaboration here, and I feel like that's a very different word. And that's like, you know, we're equal partners in many ways. We may not own the data, but we're you know, we're collaborators in terms of being one of the important components of a team. And you know, you don't want your teammates to come to you in a fire drill. So that's just one thing I would like to convey is, you know, what you would like to do is communicate when you start working with people that, you know, we're collaborators, and you know, we need to keep an open form of communication, but we also need to make sure that we're not tapping us only when there's an emergency and then expecting good results in a short period of time. That will lead to collaborations that will end not very well. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Joel. I think that's very true, and it happens more often than we would like. Another thing is that I just and some people may disagree with me on this, but at least this is something this is my philosophy, my personal philosophy, and that is, if someone comes to me like with a fire drill, I don't deliver bad quality work. And I am very explicit with them that, you know, this is what you want. I will do what I can, and I will take as much time as I need to provide something that is adequate. I mean, I'll try to be a partner in it, but if you can't come to me later and say that, oh, like, you know, you overcharge time for it, because if something is coming at the last minute, it's probably going to cost you a lot more than if you, like, if the study was designed well to begin with, for example. So, and I think it's one of those kind of unfortunate situations that is very commonplace. So as much as like we would like to educate people that, you know, that this is where we are going to be most useful, sometimes they need to get the reality shock. And I think, and sometimes, you know, either that collaboration, as Joel pointed out, is just going to, you know, just disappear, because then they're going to think, okay, well, you know, they can't afford your expertise, or like it's overkill or whatnot, or they will get their act together for next time, and it might be a learning opportunity. But I think our job is that we don't want to compromise quality, because that ultimately, like, that is our responsibility, and our name is on there. And I think that if we like bow to, you know, pressure to do something, it's like, you know, it's like a contractor bringing a contractor to your house, and the homeowner just like kind of wants to put, you know, new cabinets on a kitchen that has like destroyed plumbing. You know, you could do it, but then if the, you know, if the pipe breaks, like, you don't want it to be your responsibility to put these beautiful cabinets on like broken pipe. So I think this is one area that you just kind of have to be true to yourself, and just, you know, have, you know, we all have to respect each other. And I think this is kind of where like mutual respect like really comes into place.
Thank you. We do have a question at this time from one attendee. They're asking, can you suggest a book on statistics that a clinician can understand? Any thoughts? I do see a book
Could you elaborate on what kind of clinician and what kind of statistics? Because
Yeah,
I think it really depends on the goal of the analyses, but I could say that the literature is, I mean, I can't point to like one handbook, but I don't know, Joel, you're more academic.
Yeah, so there's one book by Jessica Utz called Seeing Through Statistics, which is a really good non-technical book for people to understand subjective probability, understand statistics without getting too deep into formulas and that kind of thing. So it's a good non-technical resource and a very common sense approach to understanding numeracy, probability, and statistics. I think a lot of people who maybe are afraid of statistics will understand it, but there are some clinicians who are good at statistics. They just don't have the same training as statisticians do, you know, at the master's level, let alone anybody with a doctoral degree. So it really depends on where they're at in terms of their training. But if they're kind of like not really wanting to hear about hearing about formulas and that kind of thing, and just want to have an effective understanding of sampling and inference and that kind of thing, without the formulas, that's a good book. Sorry, did you just post that into the?
I posted another book, and I'm just posting this one. Yeah, so the one that I posted, it's specific to study design and some analysis for some common epidemiological studies. So I found this to be helpful. I mean, I think it's there are choices for different objectives, but yeah, it's hard to just like kind of give like one particular book that, you know, that the clinicians could, and clinicians are, that's also very broad, I guess, as well. So you have clinicians from more of a, you know, medicine background, and then you have clinicians that are more from like a community focused social science background, and their backgrounds are going to be very different.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next question. What common barriers to effective communication have you encountered in collaborative research, and how did you address them? Common barriers.
I guess maybe I'll start since I didn't contribute on the last part. One of the things I think we run into a lot is scientists that don't know exactly what question they're trying to answer. You know, sometimes projects start and you like sort of know like what your data set looks like, but they don't entirely know, I guess, what questions they're necessarily interested in, or how us statisticians sort of fit in to that. And like sometimes I feel like sometimes some of the people we work with don't necessarily understand that we can build quite sophisticated statistical models that are not sort of out of the box things that are canned or learned from classes. And so I think as far as sort of defining a good problem, you know, that requires us as statisticians to gain some familiarity with whatever subject matter you're working with, right? So doing some of the groundwork of reading papers, maybe by some of the scientists you're working with, that sort of motivates the data that they work with, the types of problems they're interested in, so that that can help you sort of connect the dots between what things they care about and how you might formulate it from a statistician's perspective. I think that's something we run into quite often, is not having a super well-defined question. So.
Yeah, just follow up that's a really important component, is coming to a common ground with the collaborator and trying to figure out what the important scientific question that they're trying to ask. And sometimes they might not even know what they might have an idea basically what they want out of the study that they're thinking about, but sometimes they have a hard time conveying that in words. And so that's part of our job, I think, is to come to a place where there's a very particular objective, there's a particular scientific question, and something statistically that we can do to help them answer their question, whether that's at the design stage, hopefully, but if not, at least at the data analysis stage. as best we can, sometimes we can say, hey, we can't answer that question because you don't have the data for it, or you didn't have the design to allow you to really properly answer that question. But here's what you can answer. And hopefully that will be sufficient. And then use your discussion section to talk about the limitations here next study.
I was gonna quickly follow up that I think when you're working with other scientists, sometimes there's this tendency for, if you don't know what question you're trying to address, like, at least I've had this happen during meetings where like each party will sort of talk about things in sort of a big picture sense, but nothing real. It's sort of like you're always talking past each other and never coming to a common ground. And so sometimes I find it's helpful to, I don't know, do something simple with, if they give you data, you know, do something simple, have it sort of down in slides or on paper or something, so that you can start talking about things in a more concrete sense that, well, actually, we didn't actually care about this particular problem, but there's something similar that we could do. You know, doing some of the initial work of like trying something can sometimes, I think, accelerate some of these communication barriers.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think kind of going back to the study objectives, I don't necessarily see that as a barrier. I think that is the goal. I mean, that is what we do, is to help translate, you know, research questions into statistical objectives. And that is like probably the first step of any analysis or design, is to try to figure out what we're trying to answer, and then go about our business of, like, you know, trying to gather the tools to answer that particular question, whether it be collecting data or analyzing data or pulling the right data, you know, scraping the right data, you know, whatever we need to answer that question. So, but it can be challenging because not all questions are well defined. So as an example, I recently worked as part of this consortium for chronic kidney disease, and one of the challenges was that this is a new disease for which there is no case definition. So a lot of the common study designs that we were looking at and the team was looking at assumes that you know how to identify the disease. And when you can't identify disease, what is the next best thing that we could do to identify red flags that may lead to disease? And this was something that was very difficult. It wasn't something that and we actually had a very large and fabulous stats team. I think it was like, we were like 8 PhD level statisticians working on this team, because it was just a very difficult problem, and you know, very decorated clinicians. But it took about 8 months for the consortium at large, like consisting of like 70 people, to figure out what is the best marker that we could, you know, get to identify this. And we ended up landing on a very simple statistical design. So it was basically like we ended up using this EGFR, which is like a marker of, like, you know, kidney filtration, and just like, you know, just ended up doing like a very simple like observational study design, cohort design to get that. I mean, not very simple, but like, you know, a standard design. But there was a lot of back and forth, and as you know, Justin and Joel pointed out, like the way that we were able to even have that conversation was to do multiple versions of tables and sample size calculations and draft, you know, shell tables, and like, you know, just like very quick back of the envelope analyses under like different scenarios that we were able to, like, you know, figure out, okay, this is something that we could work with, like, you know, moving forward. So was it a waste of time to do all those scenarios? You know, in retrospect, now that we figured it out, we could go back and say, okay, well, you know, that wasn't really necessary. But had we not gone through that exercise, we probably would have still not been able to figure out how to collect the data and how to answer that question. So it can be frustrating, but I'm not sure if I necessarily see that as a barrier. I just think, some problems are just more complex. And we don't know what we don't know until we get down and dirty and we have to, solve that problem. And that's what we do. So, we're problem solvers, and we do that.
Thank you. I'll ask one more question, actually two more questions that have been asked. Your thoughts on this? One attendee asks, are there training sessions that statisticians can lead to explain what they do? Kind of like an explain like I am 5 presentation.
Sorry, could I ask what you mean by lead, like take or teach?
Statisticians lead, maybe, I don't know, training sessions, maybe teach or talk about that. Like NIST does many of these things, or any conferences. I'm not sure what exactly is meant by that, but statisticians can lead to explain what they do.
So maybe Ari, if you could put a follow-up question. Oh, teach others. Okay. Thank you.
Teach others. Okay. Yeah. And also, another question where, so this is one, the other question is, one attendee teaches an undergraduate research methods course that has a statistics component, and they've been searching for a book that's for a wide range of majors, preferably an open source book. Any recommendations?
So we may have something out in like 3 years, but not at the moment. That's a very tricky that's a very tricky thing. But I think if depending on what the subject level is, there are some like epidemiological books that I know of. I think there may be some in like the engineering sciences or like or psychology, but I know of some epi books that touch on some of those issues.
Yeah, whether that's an open source book or not, that's another question. That probably I'll ask the attendee to search on Google and find out. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll ask another question. What techniques do you recommend for managing conflicts or misunderstandings that arise during collaborative projects? That's interesting.
I could go with that one.
Please.
Try to document everything. I think that that is probably your biggest protection. And yeah, just document things, even like it doesn't have to be like a formal doc, but like after a meeting, just send an email like, yeah, thanks for meeting today. Following our conversation, like, could you please get this to me by this date, so that then you'll have something that you could reference back. I've also found technology like Teams to be very helpful. It's kind of like a one-stop. It's helpful until it's not. So it might just like crash sometimes, but it's kind of like a one-stop shopping that you could have like your minutes and the chat and the documents all in one place. And it might be easier to find stuff if you really like need them. But that's a tricky situation, and it's very personality driven. I think for some of us that fall into certain demographics, it might be harder. Like I could say that, as a woman and as a non-native speaker, I think some of those challenges could be more so than maybe, a white male colleague. But I think it, it could happen for anyone. And yeah, and I don't really know, besides documenting, what else we could do for that.
Yeah, maybe I'll follow Sahar here. That's okay, Justin. So I think, yeah, I think communication, which has come up multiple times today, is huge, and sometimes there ends up being a conflict just because just because there has been maybe some missing element within the communication that has happened thus far, when maybe a conflict arises. And so the first thing I usually will try to do is try to resolve it and see, hey, it seems like you're thinking this, and I recommended this. I don't think you can do that based on my understanding of the data design, etc. So this would be my recommendation. What do you think? And that kind of thing. So just as you would talk to, as Sarah mentioned earlier, like mutual respect is really important in collaborations. And I think that's how I try to approach those things. Now, if it turns out the person wants to continue the conflict and not, and also, as Sarah mentioned, it is personality based, and once in a while there will be a personality you'll run into that maybe won't feel great about resolving the issue and actually wants to keep pushing their approach. Well, that's the time that you have to assess whether the collaboration is healthy and a good situation for you. And it may be, and I've done this maybe once, but I did do it. And I said, and actually there was another collaborator who was in the same boat as I was. And we both said, listen, you published the paper without our involvement or inclusion as co-authors because we're not seeing eye to eye on this. And that, effectively ended that collaboration. And I think everybody understood that at the time, but it was the right thing to do because this person didn't want to go in a direction that we felt pretty confident that it was the way to go, and they felt confident in their own way. And if you don't see eye to eye with somebody, and this is anybody in our lives, right? Like if we don't see eye to eye on something really important, we have to address it somehow, either through communication. But if it's not going to get resolved, then maybe it's time to move to working with people who you can see eye to eye with, and where there is that mutual respect, where they will listen to what you have to say, especially if it's coming from the perspective of your expertise. If they're saying, well, I don't really agree with you and about something statistical, and they're not trained in statistics, that's a little bit hard to overcome, and you have to either say, listen, this is my training, or maybe we should separate and work separately. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. I just wanted to point out that that these are like the ideal scenarios that you pointed out. There's mutual respect. There's no like personal biases. This is like the textbook example of how we want conflicts to be. But there are times that it might just be like personality based. Like for example, someone I had a experience, and maybe like I could only point to two during the whole 10 years, but a more recent one, maybe from like three or 4 years ago, was that a colleague made a mistake, a technical mistake, like a statistical mistake, and their mistake was that they were trying to correct me, and I pushed back on it, and I said that this is incorrect, like in a very cordial manner. And we had some email communications, and I sent resources to this person. And basically, I thought that they were convinced that, they understood where the source of the problem was, and we were done. And 4 months later, I learned that this person had gone and basically started character assassination for me. that I was being difficult and I was being argumentative and, you know, a bunch of adjectives. And it took a long time to pinpoint that it was basically because of me criticizing their analytical approach that they had gotten offended. And it was maybe, I mean, some people and you know, some senior people that I consulted with said that it might have had to do with my demographic profile. That was, you know, that they weren't expecting criticism from a younger female from certain background. And it so there were some inherent biases in that were driving this kind of pushback to criticism and this resistance. And they had seen it as an attack on their personality rather than just, you know, objective criticism on, you know, this approach is incorrect. And, you know, and I would have been open if, you know, if they had objective reasoning to convince me otherwise, you know, I was open to that conversation. But this was an instance that the email thread actually was extremely helpful. And it wasn't something that I had done to be strategic. It was just that, you know, we're on different time zones and we just couldn't find a time to meet. So we just like exchanged emails, but there was a lot of like, you know, kind of back and forth on like, you know, trying to figure out where the source of the problem was. And when we, you know, when I had the email communication, like that conversation ended. So that was something that was very, very helpful. And sometimes, you know, people just get bored and they do things that, you know, that maybe not be very healthy. So, I think that, you know, it comes up. It's not something that we're definitely trained for in school. It's not something that we expect to be part of our job profile, but it does happen. And I think, you know, just to protect that, try to keep stuff in writing, because you never know.
Yes. Important points, Justin.
I don't know if I have too much to add to what Sahar and Joel have mentioned. I would say I think one tactic that I think is useful, just in general for communication purposes with collaboration, that I feel is useful at least, and maybe it's not available to everyone, but you know, if you feel like you're talking past each other all the time, or you know, misunderstandings are coming up, I think chatting in person is a good thing. And it's something, of course, that we've moved away from since the pandemic. But I think you pick up a lot on sort of verbal and visual cues that you don't necessarily get in a web conferencing format. You know, web meetings are very much like one person talks for a few minutes and then someone follows up, and that doesn't really give you time to like politely interrupt or like interject things and then have it be more back and forth. And I think that's important for making sure everyone's engaged and sort of on the same page. So
yeah, absolutely. That's so important, Justin. Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, and it also, like, I think along that line, if you have the opportunity to maybe just get to know your team members, like just have like, you know, 5-minute intros, like just about random stuff. I don't know, share your, like how many kids you have or your pets, or like, you know, just, you know, random tidbits about yourself that you're comfortable sharing, because as Justin pointed out, you know, some of these kind of personality resistance issues, you could pick it up just like with a, you know, casual chit chat with someone, that you could just tell, okay, well, this person's maybe a little protective, or this person's a little tense, or like, you know, this is how they receive criticism. But like when you're only like, you know, talking about business, like on the entire call, you may not really realize the person, like, you know, it's you may not have that opportunity. So it may be worthwhile to just get to know people. That's actually something that I really miss about like in-person meetings. I think is still really helpful, especially when like you're launching a new collaboration or you're kind of trying to wrap it up, to see people face to face, because you could avoid a lot of these like misunderstandings that could blow up into something like really big by just knowing who you're talking to.
Yeah, I think that sort of heavy lifting at the start of a collaboration is a good way to mitigate the risks of these conflicts blowing up into something large. It's a little easier to, I think, set a good culture at the start rather than like try to fix things after they spiral out of control in the middle of a collaboration. So
Yeah, and I agree with both Justin and Sahar here as well. And one issue is, especially post-pandemic, but even for some people before the pandemic, they're working, possibly continents away from each other, if not countries or states or provinces, and they and it's not all that possible for many to be in person, because the in-person component is great. I think that's excellent. I think it's really good to have that communication. I like the idea of learning about each other, even just what we might think of as like not serious things. If even though we might really like our pets, it's not as serious as we can get. It's not as personal as we can get, obviously, talking about ourselves and more personal aspects of our lives. But it can really lead to just people appreciating one another, and that mutual respect, which is really important in terms of ongoing communication. But I think it's important for people to understand where they're at, and if they can't have those in-person conversations, at least do the best you can, and having those kind of ice-breaking moments, and getting to learn about one another a little bit, in this environment like we're doing right now with the Team Zoom, etc. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Yes, this is a very important topic, dealing with conflict and not being on the same ground when you're doing collaborative research. We don't learn about this in grad school. But yeah, experience helps. So my next question is, what advice would you give to early career researchers about building strong collaborative partnerships? This is something that I think even when I started out, to work hard on getting some collaborations in place. I would appreciate your thoughts on these.
I could go with a little bit, and then we could kind of just to start the conversation. So I think just try to get, go after every opportunity, and not necessarily, try to, at least at the beginning, try to be, strategic or picky. I mean, I think with every opportunity, you're going to learn something. Whether you're gonna use it directly or build your career off of it, or it's just gonna be, like learning the soft skills or conflict management or whatnot. But I think I could confidently say that irrespective of the size or the impact of the project that I have been involved in, there has not been one project that I haven't learned something from. There's always like a takeaway message from any collaboration. So whatever you could get your foot in the door, go for it. And if you get overwhelmed, well, when you're early career, that's really the time that you have to get overwhelmed, because later on, you may not be able to logistically manage being overwhelmed. And you also just have more support and more room for error when you're early career, just from a pure, cost effectiveness perspective. Your rate is lower, so you could spend more time just kind of learning and exploring, whereas when you're more, as you get more senior, your time becomes more expensive, both for yourself and for your organization and your collaborations, and you just kind of have to be more ready to just be very efficient at what you do and what you contribute. Whereas when you're early career, you just have a lot more leeway. So so my recommendation would be to just do something, even if you don't see the benefits immediately, you will nothing goes to a waste. I think that would be kind of my 2 cents.
So yeah, Justin, if you don't mind if I jump in here, yeah, thanks. So I think one thing that's very important is, you know, knowing what's rewarded where you're working, right? And so if you're with a consulting group, you know, you're going to be rewarded for, you know, one thing. If you're in, you know, a statistics department, that's going to be another thing, because there's going to be expectation that you're going to be likely developing methodological research. And so you have to be mindful, okay, I need to do some collaboration potentially, because that can expand your network, the data sets that you end up working with, the problems that you work with, you know, as has been mentioned, like you know, as Sahar mentioned, you can always learn from various projects, which is a great aspect of that. But you can't spread yourself too thin if the reward structure where you're at is, you know, not necessarily on collaborations themselves and spending time with those collaborators, but more on the methodological side. So you can get inspired with some of those projects to you know, develop new methodology, and that happens all the time. And I think that's one of the most exciting parts of being a statistician. But you know, if your reward structure is, oh, you have to, you know, publish, you know, this amount or percent of methodological papers and this other, you know, and we will give some reward for maybe applied collaborative papers, but maybe not as much. You know, you just have to be mindful of that reward structure. And you know, and obviously, if you're in an academic scenario, you have teaching too, and if you're working with the government, you'll have other demands on your time. So like, it just really depends on where you're at and the place where you're working and the reward structure. And if you're in a say a biostatistics department, then you know, you definitely have to do collaborative work, because that's going to be help fund some of the soft money requirements you have, but you know, at the same time balance it with whatever methodological developments that are required in your position. Thanks.
Yeah, I think my advice is sort of similar to Sahar's of, you know, just putting yourself out there sort of as much as possible. You know, my group at Los Alamos, we sort of function similar to an academic department. We have sort of internal seminars, and we also bring in other statisticians to come speak. And, you know, lots of universities do this too, where seminar speaker will give a talk, and then they'll sort of circulate sign-up sheets where students and faculty can meet with speakers just to chit-chat, talk about research, talk about stuff in general. And I think I've been quite active in that, both in academia as well as at Los Alamos. And I think that's been helpful for sort of initiating some of these collaborations. Not everything's going to stick. You know, sometimes you bring in a speaker that maybe you just have no similar common research interests or something, and that makes it more difficult. But the ones that do stick, it's just sort of I feel like it's sort of a numbers game. So yeah, putting yourself out there, networking, some of these like service opportunities, whether it's through any of these professional organizations, things at your workplace, you know, attending talks, giving talks to non-statisticians, I think is helpful. Anything to sort of get yourself out there is good.
Yep.
Oh, and committees. So like NIST, we could take volunteers at NIST. So you know.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Sahar, I actually fully concur with this. If any of the attendees are interested in being part of NIST, please get in touch with us. An attendee asks, out of curiosity, favorite stats software
we sort of use whatever is best for the problem. I think so. Our group has a mix of people that do stuff in R and Python, MATLAB, depending on what kinds of data you're working with. Sometimes that decision is driven by the scientists you're working with. If you're working with scientists that know Python, you're going to end up using Python probably. So personally, I like R, but I don't know if that's useful information. So
Yeah, I'll say R. First and foremost, at least that's what we utilize in our teaching, and most of the work we do with graduate students and that kind of thing. But there are a number of students who like coding in Python and are quite good at it, and we don't want to force them to, use something that they're not as good at if they're quite good and, quite good programmers, say with Python, for example. So for some projects I work on, the Python ends up being utilized. Yeah. Thanks. Sorry, go ahead, Sahar.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I personally use R, but I also concur with Justin and Joel that I think that for as statisticians, our methods should kind of be agnostic to the choice of software. So I think if anyone is comfortable with any software, we should get consistent results. I mean, if we don't, then I think there's a problem with our methodology. So I think I'm kind of flexible. One of my professors, when I was in grad school, I asked them once, like, what software do you use? And they chuckled and said graduate students. So so I think, you could always designate it to someone who you're mentoring or you're supervising, and just let them pick what they're comfortable with.
All right. So we are nearing the end of our session, but I'll ask you a couple of questions before that. So there's been some talk on, for example, using Teams for better collaboration and communication. But in general, would you like to talk about the resources, tools, technology that you found particularly helpful in promoting effective communication and collaboration?
Sharmistha, I think we have a really relevant question in the chat, and if you don't mind, could we answer that first?
Yes, please.
Because I think that's an excellent question. Not that the other questions are not good, but I think that this question is very relevant to the conversation that we had right now. And Jalen Lee asks, what are some tips for being seen more of a collaborator for the science and less as a machine that takes in data and outputs tables and plots? And I think this is, part of it is as preference. Some statistician colleagues like to be, play the role of being very scripted and doing, what they are asked to do. I am on the camp that I like to be involved in the science, and I like to be, guiding the science, and that's something that takes time and a lot of apprenticeship. And mentoring. So I think, and also just like reading about gaining some literacy about the science. Again, something that I pointed out at the beginning, our goal is not to become subject level experts, and we will not become experts. And the subject level experts, they are not going to become statisticians, even though a lot of clinicians, for example, have MPHs and whatnot, but they are not statisticians. That's why they come to us. But I think it would help if we all gain literacy so that we could have a conversation about the science. And I think that just, the more you work on a certain scientific domain, you kind of gain that literacy if you stick to that domain. Like I happen to, have literacy on HIV right now because I worked on that area for 5 or 6 years. But even though I collaborate on other subject level areas, I still don't have that literacy on mental health, for example, even though I collaborate with on mental health problems right now. So I think that just kind of takes some time and shadowing and an apprenticeship. So it's just be patient. But the more you read, the more you kind of get engaged. I think that will come if that is what your goal is.
Sorry. Yeah, and I think something I conveyed earlier is I think it's important to have that conversation early on about being a collaborator, and not, not just a numbers person or just a consultant per se. I think a collaborator is a better word that suggests that you're being involved in the scientific aspects of a problem. And I think that's really important for us, as Sarah just conveyed. I think short of that, there may be a mindset among some individuals that you could potentially be a collaborator with, that we're just numbers people, and I think that's really important to dissolve that mindset that some potential collaborators might have. And if they're not willing to dissolve that mindset, then that's someone we might not necessarily want to work with, right? So that's just also something to keep in mind. Remember that unless like you have one boss and that boss says, this is who you have to work with, you have an opportunity, and as Sahar and Justin both said, you can get at, it's good early in your career to get out there and work with, various different people. And if you'll see which collaborations can stick and which ones maybe won't be as fruitful for you or as healthy for you. And so I feel like that's something to always keep your eyes open. Work with people who are more willing to listen to you and have you involved in the science, treat you as a collaborator, have you get involved early in the study, in the design aspects, if that's at all possible, and then all the way through interpretation of the results and providing recommendations for future work. So anyway, that's my opinion. Thanks.
Sorry, one other tip, if you want like concrete tips of like getting kind of fast tracking that, might be that, and I think this kind of feeds back to the first question of like, determining the objective. If one thing that's very helpful for collaborations in general, and I think we haven't discussed, are like writing out the analysis plan. And this is not necessarily like when you're doing primary data collection, but even for like, ad hoc ancillary analyses, just like writing out the analysis plan, putting the shell tables that you that you would envision that would come out, because a lot of times like we run these analyses and analyses and analyses, and then when it comes to like writing it up in a manuscript, about 2/3 of it goes unused, and the person who's writing the manuscript just like ends up picking and choosing those bits and pieces that go with the storyline. And sometimes it's helpful to go through the exercise of thinking about what the storyline is and having very targeted analyses to fit that storyline. And this is like in particular for like epi studies and stuff, this becomes very important. And through the process of collaborating on that analysis plan and coming with the shell tables and holding like your collaborators, especially if they're subject level experts, engaged in kind of determining that storyline, that's also an opportunity that you could learn a lot about the science as well. And then next time you're working on like the next project, you've already like you have something to build on. So I think this serves like, a lot of purposes, both in terms of kind of negotiating the scope of the work, which can become like very, very critical, especially when like resources are in place, and having analyses that are relevant, and also for you to learn about the science, and for the scientists to learn about the role of the analyses. So it could be a learning opportunity for everyone involved. And it takes time, but there has not been one study that I've been involved in that I haven't insisted on an analysis plan, and the collaborator has not come back at the end when everything was done and like the manuscript writing was so simple and straightforward that they haven't thanked me for it. So you get a lot of pushback at the beginning, but once everything is like nice and clean, everyone does realize it, and at least in my experience, has been appreciative.
I think the only thing I was going to add is just to be, this takes time, but be as well-rounded of a statistician as you can be. So I think there are some projects that I've been on where, you know, a simple regression is fine, right? You don't need to build a fancy model. And so if that's the case, then, you know, divert a lot of your effort into making really nice plots that are digestible to a scientific audience, right? Because that's something that maybe with research stuff, you don't necessarily focus on a ton. You know, if it's a project that requires new methodology, then maybe you can spend more time focusing on that. But if you become sort of a jack of all trades, I think that sort of cements your place as being a valuable collaborator.
Thank you. Very important points again. So we are at the point where we can conclude this session. I think a lot of questions have been answered, questions that I've asked directly and ones that I haven't. The panelists have touched on them. I think the last question I'll ask you is, do you have any other thoughts that you may want to add for our attendees? Yeah, you know, starting researchers, new researchers, any advice, any resource that you would like to point them to for effective collaboration?
Yeah. I think someone put some in the chat, which I haven't, I didn't get a chance to read through them yet, but I have marked them. They seem to be very helpful.
Yes.
One I guess resource that I would point out to is improving your writing, and also you know, documenting your code for like, so for collaborations with, you know, statistician, like just like code documenting or having like a central repository. So your coding would be as reproducible as possible. R Markdown is a great resource if anyone, you know, hasn't used it yet. But also just like with subject level experts, making sure that you write very clear and succinctly. And it's not something that we are necessarily trained as statisticians on, that type of, you know, just very like lay language, casual writing that's not necessarily very technical, and not like literary writing either. It's like you just want to be like very clear and succinct and like down to the point. I did ask someone that I know on my kids' swim team, actually, another parent who is a technical writer, and he pointed me to Purdue University has a free writing center that has a lot of online resources. And he said that was a good resource to get started with. Just maybe just like some templates on like the language of, you know, writing and whatnot. And I mean, it is something that we all kind of learn over time, but if you want to really fast track that, that might be a good resource.
I was just going to add two things on the writing front. I think one is if you are on a collaborative project in a different scientific field that's not statistics, and you have the opportunity to submit a paper to a non-stats journal, I think that's quite useful. Just to, I think, to learn about other review processes of other journals, and also just to, you know, the way you sort of structure papers when you're submitting to like a geosciences journal, for example, it's going to be very different from how you structure your writing if you're writing a JASA paper or something. And so I think sort of taking those opportunities to write or present to other audiences is good. There was something else I was going to say, but I forgot, so I'll mute myself.
Yeah, I think just the overall message of documenting is great, and that could be from meetings that we've had with our collaborators to the code that we're utilizing in our Markdown is a great resource for that purpose. And I really harp on the students I work with to make sure that they are very good at documenting code and any other research meetings that we have, because those things are, sometimes we'll be in a meeting and someone's not taking notes, and you're thinking there's, maybe they have an amazing memory and they're going to remember this 2 months from now, but very likely they're not going to remember at least every detail. But if you're doing some good documenting, then that's something that will be able to be reflected upon at a later point in time, and it makes jumping back into a problem, not to mention raising the discussion points potentially with your collaborators, much easier. And so I find that kind of documentation is good for any aspect of working on a research project. Thanks.
Yeah, just one other thing on the documentation. I think it would help if you, and this is something that I have to confess I haven't done as much as I would love to do, but I think if you could kind of, document the thought process and where you landed on the kind of analysis that you did, or like the analysis plan that you did, or the design that you did, I think that would also be really helpful, even for like your future self, like a year from now, let alone like, for others to kind of remind yourself of what that thought process was. Because a lot of times we see that final product without a lot of like kind of rationale of like how we got there. And it might, if there's like a place to just kind of, write that, or say, these are the other options that we explored, but we settled on, we explored like these like non-parametric Bayesian methods, but then we settled on like a, simple linear regression because like, it was appropriate for this and this and this reason. I think it would really help, like once you want to come back and build that, so you won't have to like reinvent the wheel and go through the same journey every single time. As Justin pointed out, a lot of times like, simpler is better actually. And that's something that probably is something that deviates from what we learned in grad school. I mean, a lot of times just like very simple parametric, t-test might do the job, and you don't really need like all this fancy machinery.
Just super quick, I don't know if we had a chance to touch upon this, but too deeply, but we, often we're going to need to have a common language with people whose expertise is in, a vastly different area. And so this is really important for us to understand that we are coming from different backgrounds, often with the people we're collaborating with, and to, we might not be able to speak on their terms because we don't have necessarily that expertise, just like they can't necessarily speak on our terms in the way that we might when we talk to other statisticians. But we have to somehow find some common language that would lead to more effective communication. And so that's just something that really comes with time, and maybe through some of these resources that people have been posting. Anyway, that's just something to think about as you're moving along in your career and doing future collaborations.
Sahar, did you?
No, I forgot to lower my hand from the previous.
Okay. Thank you, panelists. Sahar, Justin, Joel. You talked about some very important points. Thanks for sharing your experience. So we are concluding this panel on effective communication and collaborative research. Our panelists have emphasized the importance of clear, open communication as a foundation for successful teamwork. So, and many other points that I'm not repeating. I'm hoping that this is of importance to you. If you're starting your collaborative work or you're already doing collaborations. So we'll conclude now, and happy Friday and have a good weekend ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Sharmistha, for organizing and chairing the session, and thank you all for your excellent questions and comments.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.